Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Raiden Shogun, which is the other character on our banner. Now last time we made a video over Kanish because he's one of the characters on the banner as well as a new character. And the other character on the banner is obviously the Raiden Shogun. So we're going to be talking about her and talking about kind of the best tips and ideas to really go for building her, as well as looking at actually how to play her as a character. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into looking at her talents and her talent priority. Looking at Raiden, your talent priority should mainly focus on your burst. This is where most of your damage does come from. And we're going to get into a little bit later on why you don't have to level into your normal attacks. People are going to be talking about, well, she does normal attacks and charge attacks after you do the burst. Well, those attacks even still are considered as elemental burst damage. So the whole point of actually doing that is to still go into the burst all the way. Now, after that, you should go a little bit, if you can, if you want to go into the skill. This is mainly going to be helping other characters' damage and other characters' burst damage. That's kind of the major idea with that skill. And once again, the normal attacks, if you want to, you can bring up to 6 or whatever, just because it's cheap, but there's really no reason to really bring it beyond that. You're never really actually getting anything from the normal attacks anyways, and so it's very difficult to actually go into this. It does help a little bit. You have some resolve obviously with the burst, but honestly with those normal attacks you don't see any of that. Everything you see here is just these basic normal and charge attacks and plunging attacks. There's nothing here that's helping from any of the normal attacks that you do in your burst or your charge attacks either. As you can see, they have totally different modifiers that are going to be completely different than what you get from the normal attack talent. So if you want to, you can level into the normal attack talent, but just remember that it's not going to have literally any return on Raiden whatsoever, unless you're just walking around in whatever and just doing normal attacks like this with no infusion. So that's the only thing that's really going to help, which is why you can level into it a little bit, just so that, I don't know, your basic numbers, your normal attack numbers go from a physical hit of 400 to a physical hit of 600. I don't really know. But honestly, the whole point really leveling into it doesn't really make too much sense. So once again, don't worry too much about it. But going into the rest of her kit, actually talking about the talent info for her skill and her burst. So looking at her skill, the Raiden Shogun unveils a shard of her euthymia and then deals electro damage to nearby opponents, granting nearby party members the Eye of Stormy Judgment. So looking at the Eye of Stormy Judgment, when characters with this buff attack and deal damage to opponents, the Eye will unleash a coordinated attack, dealing AoE electro damage at the opponent's position. So as you're dealing damage with other characters, Raiden can even be off-field while this is happening, and as they deal damage on-field or off-field, if, those characters are even off-field, Raiden will have an extra damage hit of AoE electro damage that will be a coordinated attack, very similar to how we saw in Yelan or Xingqiu or someone like that. That's kind of the idea here. Characters who also have gained the Eye of Stormy Judgment will have their elemental burst damage increased based on the energy cost of the elemental burst during the Eye's duration. So what you want to do usually is start out your rotation with Raiden's skill, and then go ahead and switch over into using the burst of other party members so that they are getting this buff based on when they do elemental burst damage. But their elemental burst has to hit or be used as well once the Eye of Stormy Judgment or the skill has already been used. So make sure, once again, at the beginning of every rotation with Raiden, as we're going to get into teams I'll talk about later, you're going to want to make sure to always start the combat out with your skill for more than one reason, but this is one. The Eye can initiate one coordinated attack every 0.9 seconds per party, and then coordinated attacks generated by characters not controlled by you deal 20% of the normal damage anyways. So looking a little bit beyond this though, the skill attributes just kind of show you the initial damage hit plus a coordinated attack damage, and then based on their damage, elemental burst damage bonus, based on however much of their burst is costing. Obviously, if we were going to grab a different character here, let's say Bennett, even if he did a burst, his cost is 60. And if we go back here to looking at the skill, it would be 60 times 0.3, which brings it out to 18% elemental burst damage bonus for Bennett's burst specifically. Now switching over into looking at the burst, Secret Art Muso Shinsetsu. The idea here with this burst is basically where most of your damage with Raiden is coming in. The entire idea is a huge damage hit that she can do, but then there's a bunch of damage that can come afterwards that people tend to sometimes maybe even forget. Looking at this though, basically Raiden's going to take her Muso no Hirotachi and deal AoE electro damage using the Muso Ishin in combat for a certain duration afterward, which is basically turns her into a sword user instead of a polearm user. The damage dealt by Muso no Hirotachi and Muso Ishin's attacks will be increased based on the number of Chakra Desiderata's resolve stacks consumed when this skill is used. So that's the entire idea here. If you get more resolve stacks, you're doing more damage, and we'll talk about how to get those in a minute. With the Muso Ishin state, while in this state, the Raiden Shogun will wield her Tachi in battle, which is obviously her sword, while her normal and charge attack and plunging attacks will be then infused with electro damage, which cannot be overridden. When such attacks hit opponents, she will regenerate energy for all nearby party members, so she's basically acting as a battery, and energy can be restored this way every 1 second, and this effect can be triggered 5 times during the entire skill duration of the burst. While in this state, the Raiden Shogun's resistance to interruption is increased, and she is immune to electrocharge damage, so basically not allowing you to get stun locked out of it. While the Muso Ishin state is active, the Raiden Shogun's normal, charge, and plunging attack damage will be considered elemental burst damage. Once again, another reason, the main reason, why you're not leveling into that normal attack at all. Now looking at Chakra Desiderata, when the nearby party members, excluding obviously Raiden herself, use their elemental burst, Raiden Shogun will build up resolve stacks based on the energy cost of these elemental bursts. The maximum number of resolve stacks is 60. So if you look here, per energy consumed, resolve stacks are gained basically. So you're trying to see how many resolve stacks you've gained. So if we look at this and how to calculate this, if I was using the hyper carry team, which once again we'll talk about later, you're going to see an 80 cost here with the Kujo Sara. Now we already know Bennett was a 60 cost, which brings us up to 140, right? Now if we add 80 plus 60, and then let's say we're going to use a Kazuha burst as well, that is another 60 as well, which brings us to 200 points basically for the energy cost. So if we take that, we take the 200 and we multiply it by 0.2, we obviously get the number of 40, which gives us 40 resolve stacks. Now the idea here, obviously the maximum you can get is 60. So if we take the 40 stacks we have, then we obviously add it here back into the resolve damage bonus here that we can get for the damage hits that you're getting. You're then adding the 8.26% that you're just getting from leveling this talent in general, and then the 1.5% basic on the idea of the attack, which is then adding per stack. So each of these is increasing based off of that. So the attack is increased based off of the stacks. So if you have 40 stacks and you have a level 13 like I do, you're increasing it by 40 times the 1.54, which is a 61.6% attack damage bonus, basically, on top of the 8.26%, which is something along the lines of almost 70% damage bonus, based from this idea and these hits. So once again, the idea for going into bursts, and these are our kind of lower bursts as well. We have 260s coming from this. But if we used another character that had a higher energy cost, for instance, even if we had someone with consistent amounts of 80s, you're allowing those stacks even higher. So for characters usually like the national team, I believe with Xiangling has a little bit of a higher damage, or the energy cost for her burst is a little bit higher as well, right? So if you have the 80 plus, basically 3 80s in a row, you have 240, which is 40 more at the end of the day, more energy cost than this team. But once again, you're just changing the number here. So if it's 240 times 0.2, you're now bringing it to 48. Now, if they were all somehow all 90s, you're now at 270, which times the 0.2 is now 54%. So once again, the entire idea here is that the more energy cost a burst is in the team, the more damage Raiden actually does. So energy cost does matter for the other characters, right? Because we looked at the skill, and based on their energy cost, the characters who gain the Eye of Stormy Judgment will have their elemental burst damage increased based on their own energy cost of the burst they do when you have the skill out. So using the skill increases their own damage as well. If their energy cost is higher, it increases their personal burst damage. But if we switch that over to Raiden herself, she also gets a bigger damage buff based on the energy cost of other characters as well. So that's the basic idea. I know probably went into it a little too much, but that's the idea. Higher energy cost means more damage not only for Raiden herself, but the teammates that actually do the burst. Make sure though, to get the extra damage for the other characters, you're using the skill at the beginning of combat. Now let's look at the passive talents. Looking at the first passive talent, we have when nearby party members gain elemental orbs or particles, Chakra Desiderata gains 2 resolve stacks, and this effect can occur once every 3 seconds. So allowing yourself to get more of those ideas, basically allowing characters to hit more often, creating more particles, is going to allow your party members, when they actually gain those particles, to give more stacks to Raiden, which once again, you're then stacking yourself higher and higher. As your bursts are going on and whatnot, you're slowly gaining stacks, even still, over to Chakra Desiderata, making sure you're getting more of those resolve stacks. And you even saw if the other 3 characters in the party even had the maximum of 90 energy cost, you're still at, I think, 54 stacks, which is not at the 60 maximum. So once again, as you see over time, as you're rotating through characters and their bursts, or they're basically grabbing more particles, you're allowing yourself to get more and more particles. When nearby party members gain elemental orbs, you're then creating more resolve stacks, which is allowing for more damage because you're having a higher resolve stacks, which give more damage to Raiden. Now, looking at the second passive talent, it states that each 1% above 100% energy recharge that the Raiden Shogun possesses grants her 0.6% greater energy restoration from Musou Ishin, which is allowing more energy for the entire party to get their burst back for better rotations, and a 0.4% electro damage bonus. So the basic sense of how to look at this in a very broad sense is to take your energy recharge at this time, basically, right? You go into your details, subtract 100 from it. That means I would be at 158.9, right? Now, if I took that and multiplied that by my number, all you have to do is grab a calculator or whatever, and then just multiply that by 0.4. If I were to do that, I would be immediately giving myself a 63.5%-ish about energy recharge from just having a really high energy recharge, giving myself an electro damage bonus increase from that energy recharge. So I'm going from like 160 energy recharge and giving that back into electro damage bonus. Now, if I were to change that over into the Musou Ishin extra regeneration, I'm getting a 95% greater energy restoration from my Musou Ishin attacks, allowing for more consistent, or maybe giving more energy back, almost doubling my amount of energy restoration to my fellow teammates than I normally would at 100% energy recharge. So now going into the reason why and how you're going to build her, we've gone into a little bit of the why you want so much energy recharge, how she actually works, why you want maybe some other characters in the party that have higher energy costs, or maybe they just have really good kits, so that's why they're there. But either way, we've now figured out what the idea is with her kit, how she works, and why she works. Now let's go ahead and talk about how you should be building Raiden. Looking at this, we obviously saw why energy recharge is so useful, and we'll even get into why artifacts are going to make that even more clear. But obviously her personal weapon, Engulfing Lightning, is going to be her best weapon, has the main stat of energy recharge, which, because of that, let's keep that in mind as we look at other weapons in the future. Now you'll get an attack increase and you'll get more energy recharge. Like normal, we don't really talk about the weapon because it is the best for the character. And yes, for a Raiden Hyper Carry team or a Raiden Overload team, no matter what, as long as she's the main damage dealer as a main DPS thing on field, doing a lot of electro damage with her ult and everything like that, you're mainly focusing on giving her a bunch of energy recharge, so that does matter when looking at weapons. But if we're looking at, maybe you're thinking, well, I actually want to use Raiden for a different team, which is Raiden Hyperbloom. I know I'm going to bring that up just because I know a lot of people are going to be mad if I don't. So talking about the Elemental Mastery heavy state, the best weapon for that team is going to be Dragon's Bane because of the high amount of Elemental Mastery you can get from the weapon. Also, you're mainly focusing on making sure that that Hyperbloom is just doing more damage because, once again, Hyperbloom only matters on the level of the character, so make sure your Raiden is as close to level 90 as she can be, as well as making sure you have a high elemental mastery, which is making sure that you're getting constantly over that. And you don't have to worry with this build at all, energy recharge, because once again, you don't care about her burst, all you care about is elemental mastery and the level of the character. Going back to the original way to actually build Raiden, which is the Raiden National team, the Raiden Hyper Carry team, the Overload team, all these different teams you've probably heard about, the idea here is to mainly focus on energy recharge. That being said, one of her second best weapons in terms of 5 stars is going to be Staff of Homa. The reason for this here is you're getting more of an attack bonus, even though she doesn't really care too much about, HP. To give her that attack bonus, you're still getting an attack bonus and you're getting a crit bonus as well. So getting the crit damage bonus with a nice high base attack as the same as what you're getting from her personal weapon. That's the idea here. It's pretty nice. It's a pretty good weapon. Obviously, the crit damage is good. It's about in the mid-range for crit damage. And obviously, once again, the attack bonus is extremely helpful. So Staff of Homa does have a place behind, once again, the Engulfing Lightning main weapon. But it does have a good kind of spot behind the actual weapon. And if you do have an extra one of these or whatever, if you got the weapon on the opposite side, or you don't care about your Hu Tao anymore, you could use this on Raiden instead. Beyond this, though, there are some other weapons you could use, Primordial Jadewing Spear, or even something that's actually newer that has a higher crit rate, something like Lumadouche Elegy, which just gives a bunch of attack increase. You don't really care about the burning point, but once again, still you don't care too much about that, but the idea is still you're giving yourself a bunch of crit, making sure you're doing that, and then you can kind of allow other ideas of the kit actually take care of the energy recharge. Once again, the issue with going with non-energy recharge weapons is you lose a lot from that second passive talent, so keep that in mind, and that really just depends on what your energy recharge looks like. If you have her personal weapon, the highest energy recharge, my personal opinion, you want to go is 270%. When she's just standing by herself, like she is right here on, in my account, if you're just chilling in the overworld, the idea should be that as without her burst going or anything, you should be sitting at 270% at the maximum energy recharge, because once you use her weapon, you're giving yourself 30%. And when we get into the artifacts, the maximum elemental or energy recharge you can get for the burst damage increase is 300%. So once again, in a basic sense, the highest you want is 270 energy recharge if you have her weapon. If you don't, if you can somehow get as close to 300% energy recharge as possible and you have a different weapon like a crit weapon, you go ahead and do so. But once again, it's probably fine to go ahead and run some better crit ratios considering you do have a crit weapon. But still, once again, do care a lot about that energy recharge because it means a lot in her kit, even if you don't have an energy recharge weapon. Going further beyond the 5-star weapons, go ahead and quickly talk about 4 stars. I'm pretty sure the only weapon I would really use on Raiden besides one of these other weapons for, I guess, crit weapons is going to be something like Deathmatch, just because of the higher crit rate and the attack bonus that you can get here. But this is a secondary to the free weapon or the free-to-play weapon, the Catch. You can get this by getting into fishing in Inazuma. You can go ahead and get the weapon and all of its refinements all the way to R5. It does take a little bit of time, but if you care about a lot about your Raiden and you don't have the ability to get her weapon, this is an amazing substitute. In my personal opinion, I like this better than even some of the 5-star options that I have, and it's second in my personal opinion behind Engulfing Lightning, and I would actually take it over something like Staff of Homa. But looking at the Catch, it has 45.9% energy recharge at 510 base attack at level 90. At R5, it states it increases elemental burst damage by 32% and elemental burst crit rate by 12%. So as soon as you kind of take into effect, this helps you a little bit with crit rate so that you don't have to worry about it, and it is increasing elemental burst damage. So a very good weapon overall. But when we're looking at R1, if you just started out with the weapon and you have it at R1, it increases elemental burst damage by 16%, so half, and the same half with the elemental crit rate burst by 6%. So keep that in mind as you are kind of running around trying to grab what you want from this weapon. I would heavily suggest, if you use this weapon, to go ahead and just R5 it. It's going to take a lot of time, but it's going to be worth it. So once again, Engulfing Lightning, behind that R5 Catch, behind that Staff of Homa, and that's the idea with her major damage way to run her. Once again, Hyper Bloom, though, you're going to be focusing mainly on just making sure you have the only weapon that I would really suggest is using Dragon's Bane. Going beyond this and looking at artifact sets now, the only set that you should be running is the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. Once again, this is for the actual damage route of Raiden, not the Hyper Bloom route, or sorry, the Hyper Carry route or the Overload route, whatever that route is, you want to go 4-piece Emblem no matter what. If you are running a Hyper Bloom route and you're going for those 4-piece sets, the 4-piece sets you should be keeping in mind are 4-piece Paradise Lost, which when looking at the set though overall, the idea with this is increasing Elemental Mastery and then increasing a bunch of Hyper Bloom damage because of it. Going beyond that though, if you don't want to use or you don't have the ability to use a 4-piece Flower Paradise Lost, you can go ahead and use a 4-piece Gilded, which increases obviously Elemental Mastery for every party member that's different than your type, which she should be the only Electro character. So it's increasing Elemental Mastery by 80 and then most likely another 150, which is increasing altogether your Elemental Mastery by 230 when you create an Elemental reaction. So once again, idea here is using the elemental mastery idea heavily and only for that idea with those sets. When looking at Raiden though, when talking about her main way to actually deal her damage or kind of focusing on her as a DPS, the major idea for sets, once again, is 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. And as you're grinding for it, yes, you can use 2-piece of Emblem and 2-piece attack and 2-piece electro damage bonus. All of that, and elemental burst damage even. Yes, as you're getting ready. But like I said, you should be trying to get the 4-piece Emblem ASAP to just make sure you're doing the most damage with her. Now, looking forward into the main stats, we're going to be looking at energy recharge for a Sans. The goblet should be electro damage bonus or attack based on kind of, once again, if you have an extremely high energy recharge and you feel like you're getting diminishing returns with your electro damage bonus, because remember, her second passive talent based on the energy recharge gives more electro damage bonus back to you. So if you feel like I have too much energy recharge and my numbers are just different, maybe I have a really low attack, I should go into attack percent goblet and I have better stats on an electro damage or on an attack bonus goblet than an electro damage bonus goblet, then you can go ahead and run that. That should be fine. It's not going to be too much of a damage difference, and sometimes based on the Raiden, it can sometimes be better. But if you have her personal weapon, I think overall it's actually better to go into an electro damage bonus goblet based on from what I've seen with most Raidens as well as my own. Looking at the circlet, most likely you're going to want a crit rate circlet. I would rather have, at the end of the day, especially with Raiden, a higher crit rate than a higher crit damage. If you have especially a crit damage weapon like Staff of Homa, then obviously you're going to want to run a crit rate circlet. If you have a crit rate weapon like Deathmatch, then it might be best to switch over to a crit damage circlet to make sure that you kind of balance out that ratio. You'll probably have a higher crit damage in crit rate and crit damage ratio if you have a crit weapon and you're going into a crit circlet, but you're going to sacrifice a lot of energy recharge most likely for it. Now, once again, that's not necessarily bad. It just changes how her build kind of works a little bit differently. And you do lose a lot of that energy restoration as well as electro damage bonus from her second passive talent. But if we were to switch this over and look into, once again, the Hyper Bloom route, you're going to want to go into Elemental Mastery Sans, Elemental Mastery Goblet, and Elemental Mastery Circlet. Go EM all the way, and on the Feather and the Flower, look for EM anywhere you can. Nothing else matters because you don't want her burst at all, so energy recharge is useless. All you care about is using her skill to allow for constant hyper blooms. You don't want to use her burst for the hyper blooms. You want to make sure to use your skill for the hyper blooms, allowing characters like Tainari or Alhaitham or whatever, the drivers of the team, to actually use that extra, kind of do their damage, and then have Raiden's coordinated attacks happening off field and using and hitting the hyper blooms for you. Now, for an actual regular Raiden DPS ride, you should be going for, with the Sans, you should be looking for double crit and attack percent. With the Goblet, double crit, attack percent, and ER, which I don't have here. And then for the Circlet, you should be going for the opposite of your crit, as well as mainly focusing into ER and attack percent and crit. So I think in a very broad sense, ER does mean a lot when you're looking at Raiden. But even still, with my pieces that don't have an ER main stat, I still don't have any ER substat on any of my pieces that aren't an ER, main stat. All my substats, there is no ER anywhere. And I still have myself at a very high energy recharge at 260%. But that does come a lot from having a very high energy recharge weapon, which only is 10% better from something like the Catch. So if you do have the Catch, get that to level 90, use it well, and you maybe have to get a little bit of energy recharge, like 2 substats, to maybe be on par with my energy recharge from my weapon. So keep that in mind when you're actually building that, to get your energy recharge, especially if you have the 4-piece emblem, because it does increase energy recharge by 20%, and your 4-piece states that it increases elemental burst damage by 25% of your energy recharge. The reason why your maximum damage bonus is 75% is going to be at 300% is because 300% times the 0.25 is the 0.75 or the 75% damage bonus maximum. Once again, I know I've thrown a lot of numbers at you, but the idea here is 300% is your maximum energy recharge you should be at. But the people who have 300% energy recharge and they have her weapon and she's not in combat, you're losing technically 30% energy recharge that could go somewhere else. So look for a little bit less energy recharge try, if you have her weapon, to not stick so high into energy recharge and stick so close to the 300%. Try to stay between the 250, 260, 270 range if you have her weapon. If you don't have her weapon, you have something else, you can go ahead and be a little bit higher because you're not getting that 30% energy recharge when you use your burst like you do from Engulfing Lightning. Now let's go ahead and talk about Constellations. Raiden has some of the best early Constellations, but her later Constellations, in my personal opinion, tend to quote-unquote fall off for personal damage. Now, if you have the Hyper Bloom Raiden, none of this is going to be useful basically at all. But let's go ahead and talk about her Constellations. The first constellation states that Chakra Desiderata will gather resolve even faster, and when Electro characters use their elemental burst, the resolve gained is increased by 80%. So once again, more Electro characters in the team, which you're probably going to do anyways. Double Electro characters means more particles, which technically actually means more damage because of passive talents, all that stuff. And you're getting here, which means more resolve stacks, which means more damage. It's, once again, the C1 still is very good, but it's not even the star of the show here. But still, once again, it does come out with something else as well. When characters of other elemental types use their burst, the resolve gain is increased by 20%. So even though if they're not Electro characters, you still do get a resolve increase still based on what you can get, based on what their resolve stacks are. So if they are an Electro character, let's look at Kujo Sara. If you want to try to figure out what the number would be, basically, once again, we see that her skill attributes, it's 80. So normally we would get, with her burst, a 0.2 per energy consumed at a level 13 burst. So if we had 0.2 times the 80, we'd get 16 resolve from Kujo Sara. But if we were thinking, okay, based on her energy cost, right, with the C1, it states that we get 80%, the resolve gained is increased by 80%. So that number is going to be increased by 80%. So if we take 16 times 1.8, you now have 28.8. So the resolve stacks are basically almost doubling because of that energy that or the resolve stacks that you're getting because of the C1. So even though it's not the star of the show, the C1 actually does do a lot of help in the background that you just don't see. The reason why the C2 though is so extremely good is because it states that while using the Musou no Hitotachi and in the Musou Ishin state applied by her burst, the Raiden Shogun's attacks ignore 60% of opponent's defense. Now with defense, usually with the game, how it works, if you're ignoring defense or you're going past defense or you're going past something like that, and it's a set number of, let's say, once again here it's 60%, you're effectively taking your number that you would normally be doing, let's say it's 100k, you'd be multiplying that by 120%, which is 1.2. So you're actually going and adding 120% damage to you. So if you're ignoring defense of 60% or 50%, let's say 50%, it'd actually be 100% of a buff to you. So here you're actually increasing Raiden's damage for her. That's basically in a sense of how that works if you want to try to figure out what your numbers would be similar to if you had the C2. Looking at the C3, it increases the level of the burst by 3, and looking at the C5, it increases the level of the skill by 3. Looking at the C4, it states that when the Musou Ishin state applied by her burst expires, or when it's done, all nearby party members, excluding Raiden herself, will gain a 30% attack bonus for 10 seconds. This is probably just to allow, as you're switching off of Raiden and she's done with her damage state, and you're switching over to your other characters to do damage, or, once again, use Raiden's skill, and then switch over to your other characters to then do multiple bursts and skills to get ready for Raiden to do her big damage hit again. You're giving them a bonus attack so that they can do more damage while Raiden's basically in cooldown to do her big damage hit again. So actually a pretty good C4, but it doesn't actually help Raiden at all, which is why I said that it just kind of starts to lack a little bit more. But the reason the C5 just isn't really that great either, once again, is just because you're increasing the level of the skill, which is just the skill damage and the coordinated attack damage, which isn't really the star of the show, really even close to at all, and so you're not really getting too much buff for this constellation. The C6 states that while in the Musou Ishin state applied by her burst, attacks by the Raiden Shogun that are considered part of her elemental burst will decrease all nearby party members' elemental burst cooldown by 1 second when they hit opponents. And this effect can trigger basically a total of 5 times and can happen every 1 second. So you can get 5 seconds of cooldown taken off of other characters' burst. So for Kujo Sara, her cooldown is normally 20 seconds, it's now brought down to 15 seconds. Kazuha, if you took at his burst, it's a cooldown of 15 seconds, it's now down to 10 seconds. Bennett goes from a 15-second down to 10 seconds as well. So the idea here is that you're helping your other characters get their burst quicker when you're actually switching over to them now. So if you've taken a long time or you haven't really, those characters aren't ready to actually use their burst, they're still in cooldown, even though the energy restoration is so good, you're allowing those other characters to make sure no matter what they have their burst ready to allow for more effective and quicker rotations, allowing Raiden to get right back onto the field for her. The C4 and the C6, really these last actually two constellations, because the C5 we kind of skip over, but with the C4 and the C6, you're really not getting as much as you really want to for Raiden out of these constellations. Once again, if you're looking at Raiden overall, the C1 and the C2 are really what you're looking forward to, majorly the C2, and the C6 is an extremely nice bonus if you can get it, but in my personal opinion, she's basically quote-unquote C6 once she hits C3 for personal damage. Now talking about teams, looking at Raiden, we see here that in a very basic sense, I'm going to go through a few different teams that you can run for all her different teams that she kind of has. The first is a hyper carry Raiden, where you have Raiden, Kujusara, Kazuha, or Viridescent, user like Jean, or another character like Venti or Sucrose. Basically, any Animo character that's using Viridescent is going to be slotted in here. Kazuha is your best option. Kujusara is the quote-unquote best option here because she's another electro character, given the elemental resonance, but the actual best reason she's here is because of her C6. Kujusara can be used before her C6, but most people don't build her until she gets there. Same with me, I didn't really build her until I got to her C6, and the reason why it's so good is because electro characters who have their attack increased by the Tengu, which she's going to be using with her skill and her burst, which Raiden's basically should always be having. At this point in time, their crit damage is increased by 60%, which makes and turns my Raiden, even though I have, once again, another reason why you can go, if you have a C6 Kujusara, another reason why you can go for a higher crit rate at like 75%, I then actually have another big damage boost of crit damage here. But once again, Kazuha is here to basically make sure he's swirling Electro, and then Bennett's here obviously as the healer, but also a huge attack scale increase for Raiden. Once again, Raiden's mainly focusing a lot into energy recharge and sometimes even crit, and so attack can fall out of the way, so Bennett can make up a lot for that. In terms of other teams you could and want to use that definitely do work, the Overload team is another fan favorite that has come recently. And the very basic way to really just change this is to run 2 electro characters, 2 pyro characters. Kujusara still sitting in the threshold of kind of where she normally sits. Bennett staying where he is. All you're doing is switching out the Viridescent user for Shevers. Shevers is integral to this team at C0 all the way to C6, no matter what she is. She's very, very useful in this specific team, and she kind of has to be here. So you can't really do the Overload team without Shevers. If you want to switch over to a different electro character, that's fine. You're just probably not going to get a huge buff. If you want to switch to Fischl or Yaimiko, just for more of extra damage, extra team damage, that can work, as well as keeping the resonance going, as well as making sure Shevers only wants pyro and electro characters in the team, which satisfies with this team as well. Looking over a different route as well is the actual one of Raiden's initial teams that she was run in, which was the Raiden National team. Which, if we take the Raiden National team, that is where we get Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Bennett. This is Raiden National team. It's very free-to-play friendly. Xiangling you can get from the Abyss. Xingqiu and Bennett are in the shop, as well as they are rerun a lot, so you most likely have at least one copy of both these characters, and then Raiden herself. The idea here is to make sure that Xiangling has an actual very high burst cost, which we talked about earlier, as well with 80. Xingqiu even can be very useful because he's allowing constant reactions for this type of team, but even still, once again, with his burst, you're making sure that no matter what with him, you're getting an 80 energy cost as well. So even higher than what Kazuha was giving. Kujusara was at 80, and so is Xiangling, and then obviously Bennett is still the same here as a character, as the healer, and mainly making sure that you have extra characters that are high energy recharge. Xiangling's a high energy recharge character, which is making sure she's getting her burst back, and usually it's the same thing with Xingqiu as well, and Bennett is also high energy recharge, allowing for the entire team to get their burst back very easily, and making sure that Raiden can get the most damage when they actually get to do their burst so consistently. It's a very good team, very free-to-play friendly, and a very strong team actually, even still at this part of the game. Now, looking a little bit deeper beyond Raiden and the kind of normal DPS route, you could talk about running a different kind of team. And the other type of team you could run is a Raiden Hyper Bloom team. Now, this isn't exactly how this team has to look. You could run any Dendro characters and Hydro characters that swap around in different places, all in between this, and making sure Raiden's the only Electro character, with most likely, in my personal opinion, running 2 Dendro characters so that you can have the Dendro resonance, which is increasing the entire party's elemental mastery by a bunch, as well to make sure that Raiden's doing the most damage, as well as some of these other characters like elemental mastery as well. So even using someone like Tighnari is a great, kind of vibe and, team fit for this as well. So using this team with Hyper Bloom, double Dendro, a Hydro character, whether that be Yelan, Xingqiu, Farina, whatever, make sure to have constant application so that your Dendro characters are creating Bloom for Raiden, then to use her coordinated attacks to do damage while the main damage dealer is on the field doing damage. Also, if we're looking a little bit differently, to kind of go for a quick swap team, actually, which I have to go find him because I do not have him built. But if we looked at someone like Tighnari and Raiden, both these characters don't like to be on field for too long, so actually putting these 2 characters together for a little bit of time is actually not a problem usually. Now, this team doesn't exactly have to look like this. I just threw Kujosara in there for double Electro. If you want, you could throw Fischl in here. If you could throw in a Viridescent Swirler to make Raiden do more damage. Kujosara is here to increase attack, basically, so that could help Tighnari or Raiden. Obviously, with her burst, it's going to help, or the skill, it's going to help more with Raiden with doing more electro damage. But either way, you have double Dendro, double Electro, making sure everybody gets their burst back. Tighnari has a limited time on field. Raiden's the same way. You do your burst, you do the normal attacks after the burst, and then you switch over to Tighnari, which he just uses basically his skill, and whenever his burst is available, he uses that as well. And he's using his skill and then his charge attacks. Back and forth, that's why we call it a quick swap team. It's because they're constantly going back and forth, Raiden and Tighnari, back and forth, to make sure they're doing damage together. Now, the issue with running Raiden in this team is that you're focusing mainly to help Tighnari do spread damage, which is nice, and you could even, once again, you could even take out Kujosara here and put Nahida, but you're mainly just helping Tighnari do spread damage. So it's actually more helping Tighnari than Raiden, and if you want Raiden to do well, you almost have to throw her on a 4-piece Gilded or something to actually make this team extremely strong. So once again, there are so many different teams that Raiden can be thrown on, and there's a lot that Raiden is kind of put together with normally, but I think overall some of the best teams I've seen is going to be the Hyper Carry team with a C6 Kujosara. If you don't have that, though, you could switch to another Electro character, that's fine. And even, once again, another extremely strong team is going to be her Overload team as well. But at the end of the day, I think most of these teams will work, and if you do run that Hyper Bloom team, you can. It's not my favorite, but I did want to bring it up because I know people were going to talk about it.
No, it's one with wind and cloud. I'm going in. Glory to the Shogun. Now you shall perish. Your coming was foretold. Where the eternal oasis. Illusion shattered. Flowers and Gurama. Teamwork is true. Strike. Inazuma shines eternal. The eternal oasis of long life. There is no escape. Wind strike. Going in. Storm the front. Torn to oblivion. Clouds high. First. Everybody stand! Flash! Glory to the Shogun! Now you shall perish! Illusion shattered! Drop your weapons! UF! Going in! No turning back! Inazuma shines eternal! Your coming was foretold! Bloom as the flowers in Gurama! Final warning! down. Hands running. Teamwork is strict. Quiver. Inazuma shines eternal. There is no escape. Stop right there. Justice will. Why do they never miss? Let's light it up. Everybody stand. Glory to the Shogun. Shine down. Get them. Let me lead you a breath. Teamwork is strict. Now you shall perish. Your coming was foretold. For the eternal oasis. Illusion shattered. Nice and spicy. No, my sword. Witness the power. I'm going in. Inazuma shines eternal. The eternal oasis at long last. Boba, get them. Rain outlines your fate. Let me lead you on. Everybody stand. There is no escape. Torn to oblivion. Witness the power. Teamwork is strict. Eat this. Nice and spicy. Now you shall perish.
Well, that's everything I've got talking about the Raiden Shogun. If you guys have any ideas or further ideas of how you guys build your Raiden, if you guys used any of the builds that I was talking about, whether it was that extra Hyper Bloom route or the Tainari quick swap or anything that was different than normal, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. If you use her differently, please do let me know. Kind of let me know how different Raidens are used. I do have a C3 Raiden, so I get to see a lot of the stronger parts of her, but when she first came out, I used her at C0 with an R5 catch. So I had her when she first released, but I didn't have her weapon. And I didn't obviously have all the constellations either. So I got to see Raiden when she was kind of quote-unquote weaker, but obviously now with the C3 R1, I have an extremely strong Raiden. And I know a lot of people over time have said that Raiden's just basically fallen out, she's not that good anymore, but from what I've seen, she's an extremely strong character. Overload helps so much with that, as well as in general, she just helps even with that hyper carry team. Having that C6 Kujosara does help an extreme amount. Well, once again, thank you guys for watching the video though, and I'll see you guys in the next one.